The terms are simple, Ms. Anderson. I provide the compensation, you provide the heir. No strings. No contact after the birth. Do we have an agreement? Robert Sterling's voice was cold and authoritative as he sat behind his massive desk. The contract between them laid out like a battle plan. Sophia Anderson met his gaze unflinchingly, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision before her. I'm doing this for my family, Mr. Sterling. I can follow a contract. I just hope you can follow your heart when that baby actually arrives. Robert Sterling thought he could buy a future without ever having to feel again. He was wrong. Have you ever built walls around your heart, only to realize too late what truly matters? Have you ever pushed away the very person who could heal your broken heart, only to watch them begin to build a life with someone else? This is the story of a man who thought he could buy an heir without strings attached, and the woman who taught him that the most precious things in life can't be controlled by contracts. Will Robert's jealousy drive Sophia further away? Or will he finally learn that true family means opening your heart to love, even when it's messy and unpredictable? Rain pounded against the windshield as Robert Sterling gripped the steering wheel of his Bentley, knuckles white with tension. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, much like his mind struggled against the images that had haunted him for days. Sophia smiling up at another man, her hand resting comfortably on his arm, her laughter carrying across a crowded charity gala. Dr. Jim Whittaker. Even the name made his jaw clench. Robert pulled into the quiet suburban neighborhood, a world away from his Lakeshore Drive penthouse. The modest homes with their tidy yards and family sedans in the driveways represented everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. Until now. He parked across from a small craftsman-style house with cheerful yellow trim. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see warm light spilling from inside. A home. Not just a house, but a home. The bouquet of daisies, Sophia's favorite, lay on the passenger seat, already looking slightly wilted. A pathetic peace offering, but he hadn't known what else to bring. What did you bring to the woman who had carried your child, who had changed your life, who was now slipping away to another man? Taking a deep breath, Robert stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. By the time he reached Sophia's front porch, his tailored suit was soaked through, water dripping from his silver-streaked hair into his eyes. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What right did he have to be here? Their contract had been fulfilled. She had given him Grace, his beautiful daughter, now 6 months old. Sophia had walked away with her payment as agreed. No strings, no contact. Those had been his terms. Before he could retreat, the porch light flickered on, and the door opened. Sophia stood in the doorway, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. "Robert, what are you doing here?" He stood there, dripping on her welcome mat, the once immaculate CEO of Sterling Innovations reduced to a sodden, desperate man clutching drooping flowers. "I saw the pictures," he said, his voice rough. "You and Dr. Whittaker, at the Children's Hospital benefit." Sophia's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing her features. "You're checking up on me?" "No. Yes. I don't know." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "May I come in? Please." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You're soaking wet. At least dry off before you leave." Relief washed over him as he entered her home for the first time. It was everything his penthouse wasn't warm, lived in, filled with books and photographs and colorful throw pillows. A home with a soul. "How's Grace?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral as she handed him a towel. "Is she with your sister tonight?" The question revealed both her care and her distance. She knew nothing of his daughter's life now, as per their agreement. "She's with the nanny," Robert said, running the towel over his hair. She's perfect, Sophia. She smiles all the time now, and she's starting to sit up on her own." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, longing, perhaps, before she masked it. "I'm glad to hear that. I shouldn't have come," Robert said, suddenly aware of his intrusion. "I don't have the right." "No," Sophia agreed quietly. "You don't." As they stood in uncomfortable silence, The memories of how they'd arrived at this moment came flooding back, 18 months earlier. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Sophia Anderson's kitchen table as she stared at the contract before her. 40 pages of legal terminology that essentially boiled down to 9 months of her life in exchange for $2 million. Enough to pay off her mother's mounting medical bills, set aside a college fund for her younger brother, and still have a comfortable cushion for herself. "Take your time, Ms. Anderson," said the silver-haired attorney sitting across from her. "Mr. Sterling wants to ensure you understand every detail before signing." Sophia tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and looked up. "I understand the terms. I carry a child created from Mr. Sterling's sperm and a donor egg. I receive medical care at his expense plus the agreed-upon compensation. After delivery, I relinquish all parental rights." Her voice remained steady, professional. "The contract is clear." What the contract couldn't capture was why she, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher with a master's degree and a close-knit community, would agree to such an arrangement. It couldn't explain how she'd spent her 20s caring for her father through his long illness, postponing her own dreams of marriage and motherhood, or how, just when she'd begun to rebuild, her mother's diagnosis had arrived like a cruel echo. The attorney nodded. "Mr. Sterling is a very private person. He prefers to keep emotional complications to a minimum." "I'm not looking for complications either," Sophia said, picking up the pen. "Just fulfilling the agreement." Her eyes fell on the final clause of the contract, the one Robert Sterling himself had added in his own handwriting during their only face-to-face meeting before today. "Upon delivery and transfer of the child to the intended parent, all contact between the surrogate and the intended parent shall cease permanently. No visitation rights, no updates, no future contact of any kind is permitted or expected." When she'd first read those words, they had seemed unnecessarily harsh, even cold. But Sterling's attorney had explained his client's reasoning. Mr. Sterling believes clean breaks are best for all parties. No lingering attachments, no messy emotions, no confusion for the child. As she signed her name on the final page, she wondered briefly about the man behind this contract, Robert Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, whose face occasionally graced business magazines. Widowed, no children, reportedly married to his work. A man who wanted an heir but not the messiness of relationships. Perfect, she thought, because messy relationships were exactly what she didn't need right now. Robert Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching Chicago's skyline glitter against the night sky. At 48, he'd built an empire that spanned 3 continents, employed thousands, and had made him a fortune that exceeded even his ambitious younger self's dreams. And none of it mattered tonight. He loosened his tie and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it absently. The board meeting earlier that day had been particularly pointed, with several members questioning his long-term succession plans for Sterling Innovations. "The company needs stability," Lawrence Hargrove, his longest-serving board member, had said. "Shareholders are getting nervous about the lack of clear succession." "You're not getting any younger, Robert." It wasn't the first time the issue had been raised, but it was the first time it had struck such a nerve. At 48, Robert had built something extraordinary from nothing, transforming his small tech startup into a global powerhouse. The thought of it eventually being dismantled by corporate raiders or diluted by disinterested shareholders after his retirement felt like a personal failure. What he needed was an heir, someone to carry on his legacy, his vision. Someone with Sterling blood who would protect what he'd built. After losing Claire 7 years ago to a sudden aneurysm, he'd thrown himself into work, building Sterling Innovations into a tech giant. Children had been part of their someday plan, a someday that never came. After she died, he'd convinced himself that family was a luxury he no longer deserved or wanted. Relationships were messy, unpredictable, and ultimately temporary. Business, at least, was something he could control. But now, facing pressure from the board and his own sense of mortality, he'd made a calculated decision. He needed an heir, but he didn't need or want the complications of a relationship. The solution had presented itself with clinical precision. A surrogate, a donor egg, and a contract that would give him exactly what he required without emotional entanglements. His phone buzzed with a text from his attorney. Surrogate contract signed. All proceeding as arranged. Robert set down his glass. Sophia Anderson. He'd reviewed her file thoroughly, impeccable health history, master's degree in education, stable employment history teaching 3rd grade. The background check had revealed a woman who'd put her life on hold to care for her father, who volunteered at a literacy program on weekends, who had no red flags whatsoever. The perfect candidate to carry his child. A straightforward business arrangement with clear terms and boundaries. He remembered their brief meeting at his office, when he'd insisted on adding the final clause to the contract himself. She had read it silently, her expression carefully neutral. No strings, no contact after the birth. Do we have an agreement? He had asked, his tone making it clear this was non-negotiable. She had met his gaze steadily. We do, Mr. Sterling. A clean break is best for everyone. Something in her easy acceptance had bothered him, though he couldn't articulate why. Wasn't that exactly what he wanted? Someone professional, detached, who viewed this as the business transaction it was. He told himself it was simply practical to have her live in his home during the pregnancy. Maximum control over the environment, diet, stress levels, all factors that could affect his child's development. No emotional entanglements, just optimal conditions for success, as with any business venture. What he didn't admit, even to himself, was the quiet fear that had taken root since Claire's death, that perhaps he'd forgotten how to connect with anyone on more than superficial terms, that perhaps he no longer deserved to. The day Sophia moved into Robert's penthouse was meticulously planned, like every other aspect of their arrangement. Professional movers handled her essential belongings while his staff prepared her suite according to the specifications outlined in their contract: a bedroom with an adjoining sitting room, a private bathroom, and a small kitchenette where she could prepare snacks if needed. Ms. Anderson has arrived, sir. His housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, announced as Robert reviewed quarterly projections in his home office. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. Please show her to her suite and ensure she has everything she needs. He didn't look up from his computer screen. You're not going to greet her yourself? There was a note of disapproval in the older woman's voice that few would dare use with Robert Sterling. Robert finally looked up, his expression neutral. Our arrangement is professional, Mrs. Winters. Ms. Anderson understands that. Mrs. Winters had been with him for 15 years, through his marriage to Claire, through his grief after her death, through his retreat into work and isolation. She was perhaps the only person who could still reach the man behind the CEO facade. A woman carrying your child deserves a proper welcome, professional arrangement or not, she said firmly. Your mother would expect better of you. The mention of his mother, warm, kind-hearted Eleanor Sterling, who had taught him that how you treated people mattered more than what you achieved, hit its mark. Robert sighed and closed his laptop. You're right. I'll be there momentarily. When he entered the foyer, Sophia was directing the movers with quiet efficiency, pointing out where to place the few boxes she'd brought. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater that brought out the warmth in her eyes, her chestnut hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Ms. Anderson, he said, approaching with a professional smile. Welcome. She turned, surprise briefly crossing her features before she composed herself. Mr. Sterling, thank you for accommodating me. Robert, please. If we're going to be sharing living space for the next 8 months, formality seems excessive. Sophia, then. She offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. An awkward silence fell between them as the movers finished bringing in the last of her boxes. Robert noticed how few possessions she'd brought. Just 3 medium-sized boxes and 2 suitcases. Is that everything? He asked, gesturing to the modest pile. I've learned to travel light, she replied. And your email specified that the suite was fully furnished. Yes, of course. He cleared his throat. Would you like a tour of the penthouse? You should know where everything is. That would be helpful, thank you. As Robert led her through his home, he was suddenly aware of how impersonal it was. Sleek, modern, and expensively decorated, but lacking any real warmth or character. The art on the walls had been selected by an interior designer. The furniture, while luxurious, looked barely used. Even the kitchen, with its state-of-the-art appliances, showed no signs of actual cooking. The kitchen is at your disposal, though meals can be prepared for you if you prefer, he explained. Mrs. Winters manages the household staff and can accommodate any dietary preferences. I enjoy cooking, Sophia said. When I have time. You're continuing to teach this trimester? He knew the answer from their contract discussions but asked anyway, searching for safe conversation. Yes, until winter break. My principal has been very understanding about the situation. She paused. As far as she knows, I'm helping a family member who needs a surrogate. That's not entirely untrue, Robert said awkwardly. Sophia gave him a measured look. No, I suppose not. They continued the tour, Robert pointing out the gym, the library, the terrace with its panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Sophia followed politely, asking appropriate questions, maintaining the professional distance he'd established. When they reached her suite, Robert opened the door with a flourish. And this is your space. The rooms were elegantly appointed in neutral tones, beige, cream, and pale blue with high-quality furnishings and tasteful artwork. Comfortable but impersonal, like a luxury hotel suite. It's lovely, Sophia said, stepping inside. Thank you. The bathroom has been stocked with premium toiletries, but if you prefer specific brands, just let Mrs. Winters know. The closet should have adequate space for your things. The sitting room can be used as a workspace if you need to prepare lessons. He gestured to a small desk by the window. Wi-Fi information is in the welcome packet on the coffee table, along with the security codes and other household information. Sophia nodded, taking it all in. You've thought of everything. I believe in thorough preparation. He checked his watch. I have a conference call in 15 minutes. Will you be comfortable settling in on your own? Of course. Her voice was polite but distant. I wouldn't want to disrupt your schedule. Dinner is typically served at 7, but you're welcome to eat whenever is convenient for you. Just inform Mrs. Winters of your preference. Thank you, Robert. He nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. Sophia. Yes. I appreciate what you're doing. I want you to be comfortable here. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, and he glimpsed something vulnerable in her eyes. I'm sure I will be. As Robert walked back to his office, he told himself that the arrangement was proceeding exactly as planned. Professional, efficient, no complications. So why did he feel like he'd already failed at something important? The morning sickness hit Sophia like a tidal wave in her 6th week. One moment she was preparing for her day, and the next she was rushing to the bathroom, barely making it before emptiness overtook her. She'd been living in Robert's penthouse for 2 weeks, and true to his word, their paths rarely crossed. He left for the office before she woke, returned after she'd retired to her suite, and their interactions were limited to brief, formal exchanges about medical appointments and dietary requirements. Until this morning, as she knelt on the cool tile floor, trying to catch her breath between waves of nausea, a knock came at the bathroom door. Sophia. Robert's voice, usually so controlled, held a note of concern. Are you all right? Fine, she managed weakly. Just morning sickness. A pause, then, may I come in? The request was so unexpected that Sophia didn't immediately answer. The door opened slightly, and Robert appeared, impeccably dressed for work but with an uncharacteristic furrow of worry between his brows. I've brought you some tea, he said, setting a steaming mug on the counter. Peppermint. It might help. Sophia stared at him in surprise, then at the mug. Thank you. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to simply walk away. Is there anything else you need? She shook her head, then immediately regretted the movement as another wave of nausea hit. Robert surprised her by kneeling beside her, his hand tentatively touching her back. Breathe through it, he said quietly. Slowly. When the wave passed, Sophia looked at him with new curiosity. You seem to know a lot about morning sickness. A shadow crossed his face. My mother used to make this tea for my sister when she was pregnant with my nephew. She swore by it. It was the first personal detail he'd shared, the first acknowledgement that he had a family, a history beyond the successful businessman she'd contracted with. Does it work? Sophia asked, reaching for the mug. According to my sister, yes. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Though she claimed it was my mother's love that was the real medicine. The unexpected softness in his voice caught Sophia off guard. This was a different Robert Sterling than the cold, controlling CEO she'd met at the fertility clinic. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, she said, taking a cautious sip of the tea. She was. His expression closed again, the brief glimpse of warmth disappearing behind his usual mask. I have a meeting I can't miss, but Mrs. Winters will be available if you need anything. Just like that, he was back to business mode, the brief glimpse of humanity tucked away behind his controlled facade. I'll be late this evening, he continued. There's an investor dinner I can't avoid. But I've asked Mrs. Winters to check on you periodically. That's not necessary, Sophia said, slowly rising to her feet. I'm perfectly capable of managing morning sickness on my own. Something flickered in his eyes. Frustration, perhaps, or concern he didn't know how to express. Nevertheless, she'll be available if you need anything. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The first ultrasound is scheduled for next Tuesday. I've cleared my calendar to attend. For liability reasons? Sophia couldn't help asking, a hint of challenge in her voice. Robert met her gaze, and for a moment, his carefully maintained mask slipped. No, he said quietly, because I want to be there. With that surprising admission, he left, leaving Sophia to wonder about the complex man behind the controlled exterior, and why it suddenly mattered to her to understand him. The first ultrasound appointment changed something fundamental between them. Robert had arrived at the obstetrician's office precisely 5 minutes early, having rescheduled a crucial investor meeting without hesitation. He found Sophia already in the waiting room, looking pale but composed in a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, she greeted him with a small smile. You didn't need to come to this one. It's just confirmation and dating. I wanted to be here, he said simply, echoing his words from the bathroom days earlier. The technician called them back moments later, leading them to a dimly lit room where Sophia settled onto the examination table. Robert stood awkwardly by the door until she glanced at him and then at the chair beside her. You can sit, she said softly. You'll see better. He moved to the chair, maintaining a careful distance that still felt too intimate in the small room. The technician applied gel to Sophia's still flat abdomen and began moving the wand, explaining what they were looking for. And then, suddenly, there it was on the screen. A tiny fluttering light, a heartbeat. There's your baby, the technician said cheerfully, measuring right on track at 8 weeks. Strong heartbeat at 160 beats per minute. Your baby. The words hit Robert with unexpected force. Not an embryo, not a contract, but a baby, his child, alive and growing. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand finding Sophia's on the examination table. She looked at him in surprise, but didn't pull away, her fingers warm beneath his. Would you like to hear the heartbeat? The technician asked. At their nods, she flipped a switch, and suddenly the room filled with a rapid, rhythmic whooshing sound. Their baby's heartbeat, strong and insistent. Robert felt something crack inside him, a fissure in the walls he'd built around his heart since Claire died. He tightened his grip on Sophia's hand, unable to speak, unable to process the surge of emotion threatening to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. Sophia glanced at him, and what she saw in his face made her squeeze his hand in return. It's amazing, isn't it? She said softly. Yes, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Amazing. The moment stretched between them, intimate and unguarded, until the technician finished her measurements and handed Sophia a towel to wipe away the gel. I'll print some pictures for you, she said, leaving them alone in the dimly lit room. Robert reluctantly released Sophia's hand, reality rushing back as the spell of the moment broke. What was he doing? This wasn't part of their agreement. No strings attached. No emotional entanglements. A clean break after the birth. "I apologize," he said stiffly, retreating behind his professional facade. "That was unprofessional of me." Sophia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "It's a natural reaction, Robert. Hearing your child's heartbeat for the first time is overwhelming for anyone." "Nevertheless," he insisted, standing and putting physical distance between them, "we should maintain appropriate boundaries." "Of course," she agreed, her own voice cooling slightly. "No strings attached. That was our agreement." The words hung between them, a reminder of the contract that defined their relationship. Yet as they left the clinic, ultrasound photos carefully divided between them, his for records, hers for medical documentation. Robert couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, despite his determination to keep things strictly professional. Over the next few weeks, a strange rhythm developed in the Sterling penthouse. Despite Robert's initial insistence on separate schedules and minimal interaction, he found himself lingering over breakfast, arriving home earlier in the evenings, creating small opportunities for their paths to cross. He told himself it was simply responsible monitoring of the pregnancy. After all, Sophia was carrying his heir, the future of Sterling Innovations. It was only natural that he would take an interest in her well-being. But even he couldn't justify the way he began bringing her herbal tea each morning, or how he found himself asking about her day, or the evening he spent an hour helping her hang family photos in her suite to make it feel more like home. "You don't have to do this," Sophia said as he carefully positioned a framed picture of her with her mother and brother. "I'm sure you have more important things to do." "Nothing more important than ensuring you're comfortable," he replied, then quickly added, "For the baby's sake, of course." "Of course," she echoed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "For the baby." There was a knowing quality to her smile that both unsettled and intrigued him. Sophia Anderson saw through his excuses, his careful justifications for the growing cracks in his detached facade. "Tell me about your classroom," he found himself asking one evening as they sat on his terrace, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. Another unplanned encounter. He'd come out for fresh air, found her already there, and somehow couldn't make himself leave. Sophia's face lit up as she described her third graders, their personalities, their challenges, their small triumphs. "Ellie finally finished her first chapter book yesterday," she said, her voice warm with pride. "She's struggled with reading all year, but she wouldn't give up." "You care deeply about them," Robert observed. "Of course, they're not just students. They're little people finding their way in the world. Sometimes all they need is someone who believes in them, who sees their potential even when they can't see it themselves." Her words struck a chord in him, reminding him of his own third-grade teacher, Mrs. Holloway, who had recognized his aptitude for mathematics and encouraged him when his own father had dismissed his interests as impractical. "I had a teacher like that," he admitted, surprising himself with the personal disclosure. "Mrs. Holloway. She gave me extra math problems because she knew I was bored with the regular curriculum." Sophia smiled. "And now you run a tech empire. I'd say she was right about your potential. She was the first person who told me I could be more than my circumstances." The words came unbidden, revealing more than he'd intended. "My father worked in a factory his whole life. He wanted the same for me. Something stable, predictable. But you wanted more." "I wanted to build something," Robert said quietly. "Something that would last." Sophia's gaze was thoughtful as she studied him. "Is that why you wanted a child? To have someone to leave it all to?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. His instinct was to retreat, to remind her that their arrangement was business, not personal. But something in her expression, open, genuinely curious, without judgment, made him answer honestly. "Partly," he admitted. "The board has been pressing for succession plans. But it's more than that. I've built this company, this fortune, but what's the point if it all just gets carved up by shareholders after I'm gone? I want someone who understands what it took to build it, who shares my vision, my values." "And you think your child, will automatically share those things?" Robert frowned slightly. Not automatically, no. But with the right guidance, the right education, the right control? Sophia suggested gently. He stiffened. I wouldn't put it that way. Wouldn't you? Her tone remained kind, but her words were challenging. From what I've seen, Robert, control is very important to you. Our contract, the living arrangements, the dietary specifications, it's all about maintaining control. Robert wanted to deny it, but the truth of her observation was undeniable. Control had been his refuge after Claire died. The one thing he could cling to when everything else felt chaotic and painful. Perhaps, he conceded reluctantly, but structure and guidance are necessary for children. Yes, but so is freedom to discover who they are, what they love. Sophia rested a hand lightly on her still flat stomach. This child might love business and technology like you, or they might be an artist, a teacher, a chef. Would that disappoint you? The question hung between them as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the Chicago skyline. Would it disappoint him if his child, his heir, wanted a different path than the one he'd envisioned? I don't know, he answered honestly. I haven't considered that possibility. Sophia nodded, accepting his answer without judgment. Maybe that's something to think about over the next 7 months. As she rose to return to her suite, Robert found himself watching her go, struck by the quiet wisdom in her words. For someone he'd selected primarily for her physical health and lack of complications, Sophia Anderson was proving to be far more complex and insightful than he'd anticipated. Sophia, he called after her. When she turned, he added, "Thank you for the conversation." She smiled, the expression transforming her already pretty face into something luminous. "You're welcome, Robert. Good night." As she disappeared into the penthouse, Robert remained on the terrace, watching the stars emerge above the city lights. Something was happening, something he hadn't planned for, hadn't controlled. Despite all his careful parameters, his insistence on no strings attached. He was beginning to feel a connection to Sophia that went beyond their contractual arrangement. And that, he reminded himself firmly, was dangerous territory indeed. If you've ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed your perspective on life, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that touch the heart and soul. As autumn turned to winter, the walls Robert had built around himself continued to crumble. What began as occasional shared meals evolved into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together most mornings, dinner when his schedule permitted, and weekend brunches that sometimes stretched into afternoon conversations. The first snowfall of the season found them decorating a Christmas tree together in the penthouse's main living room, something Robert hadn't done since Claire died. "You didn't have to get such an enormous tree," Sophia said, laughing as she struggled to hang an ornament on one of the higher branches. At 4 months pregnant, her belly was now visibly rounded, though she moved with the same grace as always. "If we're doing this, we might as well do it properly," Robert replied, reaching over her shoulder to place the ornament she couldn't quite reach. The casual "we" wasn't lost on either of them. "Did you and Claire have traditions?" Sophia asked carefully. It was the first time she'd directly mentioned his late wife, though she knew the basic facts of his marriage. Robert stilled, the ornament in his hand momentarily forgotten. "Yes," he said finally. "We used to drive up to a tree farm in Wisconsin. Claire insisted on cutting down our own tree, even though I offered to have one delivered every year." "She sounds like she knew what mattered," Sophia said softly. "She did." A small smile touched his lips at the memory. "After she died, I stopped celebrating. It seemed pointless. And now," Robert looked around at the half-decorated tree, the boxes of ornaments they'd purchased together that morning, the holiday music playing softly in the background. "Now it feels important again. For the baby. For you," he didn't say, "because you've brought something back to life in me that I thought was gone forever." "What about your family?" he asked, changing the subject. "Will you miss being with them for Christmas?" "My mother and brother are coming for Christmas Eve dinner," Sophia said, carefully unwrapping another ornament. "I hope that's all right. I should have asked first." "Of course it's all right. This is your home too, for now." The qualifier felt necessary but somehow wrong as he said it. Sophia gave him a measured look. For now, she agreed. The reminder of their temporary arrangement hung between them like an unwelcome guest. In 4 more months, their child would be born and Sophia would leave. No strings attached. Clean break. Those had been his terms, the ones he'd insisted on. So why did the thought now fill him with a cold dread? I've been thinking, Robert said, focusing intently on arranging a string of lights. We should start discussing names. Names? Sophia's surprise was evident. For the baby. Unless you'd prefer not to be involved in that decision. He tried to keep his tone neutral, though the question was anything but, I assumed you'd want to choose the name yourself. Since. She trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. Since I won't be part of the child's life. I value your input, Robert said carefully. You're an educator. You understand the importance of names. It was a weak justification for what he really wanted, to share this decision with her, to create one more connection between them, one more reason for her to stay in their lives beyond the terms of their contract. Well, Sophia said after a moment, if it's a girl, I've always loved the name Grace. Grace, Robert repeated, testing the name. It's beautiful, simple but elegant. And if it's a boy? What about James? He suggested. After my grandfather. He was the one who encouraged my interest in technology. Gave me my first computer. James Sterling, Sophia said thoughtfully. It has a nice ring to it. They continued decorating in companionable silence, both aware that something significant had just happened. They'd named their child together, as though they were a real family, not a business arrangement with an expiration date. Later that evening, as they sat before the fire admiring their work on the tree, Robert found himself studying Sophia's profile, the way the firelight played across her features, the gentle curve of her belly where his child grew. What? She asked, catching his gaze. Nothing, he said quickly. Just, thank you, for today, for bringing Christmas back into this house. Sophia smiled, the warmth of it reaching her eyes. Everyone deserves a little magic in their life, Robert. Even CEOs who think they can control everything. He laughed softly, acknowledging the gentle teasing. I'm learning that some things can't be controlled. And how does that feel? She asked, her voice quiet but intent. Robert considered the question, looking at the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree, at the woman beside him whose presence had somehow transformed his sterile penthouse into something that felt like a home again. Terrifying, he admitted. And necessary. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Robert felt an overwhelming urge to reach for her hand, to pull her closer, to acknowledge the connection growing between them despite all his careful boundaries. But before he could act, Sophia winced slightly, her hand going to her belly. Are you all right? He asked, immediately concerned. Her face broke into a radiant smile. The baby's kicking. Here. Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on the curve of her stomach. Robert froze at the contact, then felt it. A distinct flutter against his palm. His child making their presence known. The sensation was so intimate, so miraculous, that he found himself speechless. That's our baby, he whispered, all replacing his usual composure. Yes, Sophia said softly. That's Grace. Or James. In that moment, with his hand on her belly and their child moving beneath his touch, Robert Sterling knew he was in serious trouble. Because despite all his careful planning, despite the contract with its clear terms and boundaries, he was falling for Sophia Anderson, and he had no idea what to do about it. The holidays brought unexpected warmth to the Sterling penthouse. Robert's sister, Catherine, insisted on throwing a baby shower, despite his protests that it was premature and unnecessary. Don't be ridiculous, Robbie, she said, using the childhood nickname he pretended to hate. Every baby deserves to be celebrated, and every mother-to-be deserves a shower. Sophia isn't. He began, then stopped himself. Isn't what? Isn't the mother? Biologically, no. But in every other way that mattered. Isn't what? Catherine pressed, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Because if you're about to say she isn't family, I'm going to remind you that she's carrying my niece or nephew, which makes her family in my book. Robert sighed, knowing when he was beaten. Fine, but keep it small. Sophia doesn't like a lot of fuss. Catherine's shower turned out to be anything but small. She invited her entire circle of friends, several of Robert's female executives, and even managed to contact Sophia's mother and a few of her teaching colleagues. The penthouse was transformed with pastel decorations, catered food, and enough baby gifts to fill a small store. Robert had planned to make himself scarce during the event. Baby showers were women's territory, after all, but found himself lingering at the edges, watching as Sophia opened gift after gift, her laughter and genuine delight warming something inside him. You should join us, his mother-in-law Eleanor said, appearing beside him with a plate of cake. It's your baby too. I don't want to intrude, he said awkwardly. This seems like women's business. Eleanor gave him a look that reminded him forcefully of Claire. Nonsense. Being a father isn't about standing on the sidelines, Robert. It's about being present, even for the parts that make you uncomfortable. Reluctantly, he allowed himself to be drawn into the circle, sitting beside Sophia as she opened the remaining gifts. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, and each time, he felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. This one's from Robert, Catherine announced, handing Sophia a small, elegantly wrapped package. Sophia looked at him in surprise. You didn't have to get anything. Open it, he said quietly. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain. When Sophia opened it, she found a tiny copy of their most recent ultrasound photo on one side. The other side was empty. For after the birth, Robert explained. So you'll always have a picture of the baby. The room had gone quiet, everyone aware of the significance of the gift. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was an acknowledgement of Sophia's role, of her connection to the child she was carrying but would not raise. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It's perfect. Without thinking, Robert reached out and squeezed her hand. The gesture was small but intimate, and not lost on the observant women around them. Later, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Catherine cornered her brother in the kitchen. What exactly is going on between you and Sophia? She demanded without preamble. Nothing, Robert said automatically. We have an arrangement. An arrangement, Catherine repeated skeptically. Is that what you call the way you look at her when you think no one's watching? Or how you've rearranged your entire schedule to be home for dinner every night? Or the fact that you just gave her a locket with your baby's picture in it? It's complicated, he admitted. No, quantum physics is complicated. This is actually quite simple. Catherine's expression softened. You're falling for her, Robbie. And from what I can see, she might be falling for you too. That wasn't part of the plan, he said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The best things in life rarely are. She patted his arm sympathetically. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What indeed? The contract was clear. After the birth, Sophia would leave with her payment, and they would have no further contact. Those had been his terms, the ones he'd insisted on when emotional entanglements had seemed like an unnecessary complication. Now, the thought of Sophia walking out of their lives made his chest tighten with something close to panic. I don't know, he admitted. The contract. Oh, for heaven's sake, Catherine interrupted. It's a piece of paper, not a prison sentence. Contracts can be amended. Terms can be renegotiated. She fixed him with a stern look. But only if you're brave enough to admit what you really want. What did he want? The question haunted Robert long after the shower ended. Long after he'd helped Sophia arrange the baby gifts in the nursery they'd decorated together. Long after he'd bid her good night and retreated to his own room. He wanted his child, yes. But increasingly, undeniably, he wanted Sophia too, her warmth, her wisdom, her way of challenging him while still respecting his boundaries. He wanted the family he'd never allowed himself to imagine after Claire died. But wanting wasn't having, and Robert Sterling had built his empire on calculated risks, not emotional gambles. The thought of laying his heart bare, of risking rejection, of potentially complicating what had begun as a straightforward arrangement, it terrified him in a way that no business challenge ever had. So he said nothing, did nothing, as January turned to February and Sophia's due date drew closer. He told himself there was time, that he would find the right moment, the right words, that somehow he would figure out how to keep her in their lives without admitting how essential she had become to his happiness. It was a coward's approach, and deep down he knew it. The labor began unexpectedly, 3 weeks before Sophia's due date. One moment they were having a quiet dinner, discussing the latest developments at Sterling Innovations, and the next, Sophia was gripping the edge of the table, her face contorted in pain. "Robert," she gasped. I think it's time." The drive to the hospital was a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Robert had rehearsed this moment in his mind countless times, the efficient execution of their birth plan, the calm transfer of the baby to his care, the professional goodbye to Sophia as she departed with her payment. The reality was messier, more emotional, more human than anything he could have prepared for. Sophia's labor progressed rapidly, her contractions coming fast and intense. The doctor advised an epidural, but she refused, determined to experience the birth fully, even knowing she would not be raising the child. "You don't have to prove anything," Robert told her during a brief respite between contractions. "There's no shame in pain management." "I'm not trying to prove anything," she replied, her face damp with sweat but her eyes clear and determined. "I just want to remember every moment. This might be my only chance to bring a child into the world." Her words struck him like a physical blow. In all his planning, all his careful arrangements, he had never truly considered what this experience meant for Sophia. Not just as a surrogate fulfilling a contract, but as a woman who might want children of her own someday. "Sophia," he began, not sure what he was going to say, but knowing he needed to say something. But another contraction seized her, and the moment passed. 7 hours later, their daughter entered the world with a powerful cry that seemed to announce her arrival to the entire hospital. Grace Eleanor Sterling, 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with a shock of dark hair and her father's determined chin. "She's perfect," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Sophia's chest. "Congratulations to you both." Robert stood frozen beside the bed, overwhelmed by the sight of his daughter. His child, nestled against Sophia's skin. Something primal and powerful surged through him, a love so fierce and immediate that it took his breath away. "Would you like to hold her?" Sophia asked softly, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. With trembling hands, Robert accepted his daughter, cradling her tiny body against his chest. Grace's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but somehow seeming to look directly into his soul. "Hello, Grace," he whispered. "I'm your father." In that moment, looking down at his daughter's face, Robert knew with absolute certainty that he couldn't let Sophia walk away, not just for Grace's sake, but for his own. Somehow, this woman had breached all his defenses, had shown him that life could be full and rich and meaningful again after loss. He looked up, ready to tell her everything, that he wanted her to stay, that he was falling in love with her, that they could be a real family, the three of them. But Sophia's eyes were closed, her face pale with exhaustion, her body finally surrendering to rest after the marathon of childbirth. The nurses were already preparing to move her to a recovery room. "We should let her sleep," the nurse said gently. First-time mothers need their rest, especially after a natural delivery. First-time mother. The phrase echoed in Robert's mind as he followed the nurse to the nursery, still holding Grace. Technically, medically, legally, Sophia was not Grace's mother. The egg had come from an anonymous donor. The contract was explicit about parental rights. But in every way that mattered, in the months of carrying her, in the care taken with every meal and activity, in the love evident in every interaction, Sophia was Grace's mother. And Robert had been a fool to ever think a clean break was possible or desirable. He would tell her when she woke up. He would find the right words to ask her to stay, to be part of their lives, to see where this connection between them might lead. But when he returned to her room hours later, Sophia was gone. "She checked herself out, Mr. Sterling," the nurse explained, looking uncomfortable. "She left this for you." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a brief note in Sophia's neat handwriting. "Robert, Grace is beautiful and perfect. Everything you hoped for. I fulfilled my part of our contract, and now it's time for me to step away as we agreed. No strings attached. Clean break. Take care of our daughter. She deserves all the love in the world. Sophia. P.S. I've left the locket in the nursery. Please make sure Grace knows how much she was wanted, how much she was loved from the very beginning." Robert read the note 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Our daughter. She had called Grace our daughter, even as she walked away. He had waited too long, said too little, and now she was gone. If you've ever had to watch someone walk away because you couldn't find the courage to ask them to stay, drop a comment below. Sometimes the hardest words to say are the ones that matter most. The first weeks of fatherhood passed in a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and a bone-deep longing that Robert couldn't shake. Grace was a good baby. Alert, healthy, with a strong appetite and a surprisingly sweet temperament. The team of nannies he'd hired ensured that her every need was met promptly and professionally. But something essential was missing, and they both felt it. "She's not settling well at night," the night nurse reported after a particularly difficult evening. "It's common for newborns to be restless." But what? Robert pressed, exhaustion making his tone sharper than intended. The nurse hesitated. "Babies need more than physical care, Mr. Sterling. They need connection, comfort, a sense of security that comes from consistent caregiving." "Are you suggesting I'm not providing adequate care for my daughter?" The CEO in him emerged, defensive and authoritative. "Not at all, sir. You've provided everything money can buy." The nurse's gentle emphasis on the last words wasn't lost on him. "But babies, especially newborns, often do better with fewer caregivers and more parental presence." Robert dismissed her concerns, but the words lingered. He found himself spending more time in the nursery, awkwardly attempting to soothe Grace when she cried, learning her cues and preferences through trial and error. One night, as he paced the nursery floor with a fussing Grace against his shoulder, he found himself humming a lullaby his mother had sung to him, a simple melody he hadn't thought of in decades. Gradually, Grace's cries subsided, her tiny body relaxing against his chest. "You like that, don't you?" he murmured, continuing to hum. "Your grandmother used to sing this to me, and to your Aunt Catherine." As Grace drifted to sleep in his arms, Robert felt a bittersweet ache. This was a moment he should be sharing with Sophia. She should be here, watching their daughter's eyelids flutter closed, sharing knowing smiles over Grace's stubborn refusal to sleep in her crib. But Sophia was gone, honoring the terms of their contract with the same integrity she brought to everything. No strings attached. Clean break. The words that had once seemed so sensible now felt like the biggest mistake of his life. He had his heir, his succession plan secured. Sterling Innovations would continue under Grace's leadership someday, assuming she wanted it. The board was satisfied, the shareholders reassured. So why did success feel so hollow? Catherine arrived the next morning, arms laden with baby gifts and a determined gleam in her eye. "You look terrible," she announced, setting down her packages and taking Grace from his arms. "When was the last time you slept? Or showered?" "Good morning to you too," Robert muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm fine. We're fine." Clearly, Catherine's skeptical gaze took in his rumpled clothes and the dark circles under his eyes. "Where's Sophia? I thought she'd be helping with the transition, at least for a few weeks." Robert stiffened. "She left, after the birth, as per our agreement." "Your agreement," Catherine corrected, bouncing Grace gently as she began to fuss. "Your ridiculous, emotionally stunted agreement that ignored what was obvious to everyone but you." "And what was that?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "That you're in love with her." Catherine's bluntness was tempered by the affection in her voice. "And that she might have feelings for you too, if you'd bothered to ask instead of hiding behind your precious contract. Robert sank into the nursery rocking chair, suddenly too exhausted to maintain his defenses. It's too late now. She's gone. Gone where? Back to her teaching job? To her mother's house? Last time I checked, Chicago was a finite city, not another dimension. Catherine fixed him with an exasperated look. For a brilliant businessman, you can be remarkably dense about personal matters. She made her choice, Robert insisted. She left. Because that's what you told her to do. For months you hammered home this clean break nonsense. What was she supposed to do? Beg to stay when you never gave her any indication that you wanted her to. Catherine's words hit uncomfortably close to the truth. He had never explicitly asked Sophia to stay, had never confessed his growing feelings, had never suggested that their arrangement could evolve into something more permanent. I don't even know if she feels the same way, Robert admitted, voicing his deepest fear. She fulfilled the contract perfectly. Maybe that's all it was to her, a business arrangement. Catherine rolled her eyes. Did you miss the way she looked at you during the baby shower? Or how she always made sure your favorite coffee was ready in the morning? Or the fact that she kept every single ultrasound photo in that journal she thought no one knew about? She kept the ultrasound photos? This was news to Robert. In a leather-bound journal in her nightstand. I saw it when I was helping her organize the baby clothes. Catherine's expression softened. She cared, Robbie. Maybe still cares. But you'll never know if you don't ask. The idea of seeking out Sophia, of laying his heart bare after months of maintaining professional distance, terrified him more than any business negotiation ever had. What if she rejected him? What if she had already moved on, relieved to be free of their arrangement? I need to focus on Grace right now, he said, taking his daughter back from Catherine. She needs stability, routine. She needs her mother, Catherine said bluntly. And you need the woman you love. The rest is just details. After Catherine left, Robert spent hours watching Grace sleep, memorizing the delicate curve of her cheek, the tiny perfection of her fingers. His daughter, his heir, the future he had planned so carefully. But as the weeks passed and Grace grew, changing almost daily from newborn to infant, Robert found himself increasingly haunted by Sophia's absence. He saw her in Grace's expressions, in the determined set of her tiny jaw when she was hungry, in the peaceful way she slept with one hand flung above her head. At night, alone in his bedroom while the night nurse watched over Grace, he would take out the note Sophia had left, reading it again and again, searching for clues, for hope, for anything that might suggest she had wanted to stay. Our daughter, she had written. Not your daughter. Our daughter. 3 months after Grace's birth, Robert finally made a decision. He would find Sophia, talk to her, explain everything he should have said before she left. If she rejected him, at least he would know. The uncertainty was becoming unbearable. His first call was to her school, only to discover she hadn't returned to teaching. Ms. Anderson resigned her position shortly after her family emergency, the school secretary informed him. Such a shame. The children adored her. His next call was to her mother, whose number he still had from the baby shower invitations. Mrs. Anderson, this is Robert Sterling, he began awkwardly. I'm trying to reach Sophia. A long pause followed. May I ask why? Her tone was polite but cautious. I need to speak with her. About Grace. About everything. Another pause. Sophia has been through a lot, Mr. Sterling. The past few months haven't been easy for her. I understand, he said, though he didn't, not really. What had these months been like for Sophia? Had she grieved for Grace? For him? I just want to talk to her. She's not staying with me anymore, Mrs. Anderson said finally. She bought a small house near Lincoln Park. She's been fixing it up, getting ready to return to teaching in the fall. Relief flooded through him. She was still in Chicago, still planning to teach. Could you give me her address? Or ask her to call me? I think it's better if you give her space, Mr. Sterling. She's just starting to move forward. The word stung, but Robert persisted. Please, Mrs. Anderson, I made a mistake. I need to make it right." Something in his voice must have conveyed his sincerity, because after another long pause, Mrs. Anderson sighed. "I'll tell her you called. That's all I can promise." It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Days passed with no word from Sophia. Robert threw himself into work during the day and spent his evenings with Grace, reading to her, talking to her, building the bond that grew stronger each day. But the emptiness persisted, a Sophia-shaped hole in their lives that nothing else could fill. Then, 6 months after Grace's birth, Robert's assistant placed a stack of mail on his desk. Among the business correspondence and invitations was the latest newsletter from the Children's Literacy Foundation, where Sophia had volunteered. He flipped through it absently, then froze at a photo on the 3rd page. Sophia, smiling brightly, stood next to a tall, distinguished-looking man at what appeared to be a recent fundraiser. The caption identified him as Dr. Jim Whitaker, new board member and head of pediatrics at Northwestern Memorial, with volunteer coordinator Sophia Anderson. Robert stared at the image, unable to look away. Sophia looked beautiful, her hair shorter than he remembered, her smile radiant, and the way she was looking up at this Dr. Whitaker. There was an unmistakable warmth there, a connection that made Robert's chest tighten painfully. He read the accompanying article, learning that Dr. Whitaker was a widower with a young daughter who had recently joined the foundation's board. He and Sophia had apparently worked closely on a new reading program for hospitalized children. The jealousy that surged through Robert was so intense it nearly took his breath away. Sophia had moved on, found someone else, someone who, by all appearances, shared her passion for children, her commitment to education, someone who might make her happy in ways Robert had been too afraid to try. He should let her go. That had been the agreement, after all. No strings attached. Clean break. But the thought of Sophia building a life with another man, perhaps becoming a mother to his child when she had walked away from Grace, was more than Robert could bear. Before he could talk himself out of it, he called his driver and left the office early, stopping only to pick up a bouquet of daisies, Sophia's favorite, from a florist near her neighborhood. The rain began as they approached Lincoln Park, a gentle spring shower that quickly intensified into a downpour. By the time they reached the address Mrs. Anderson had reluctantly provided, water was streaming down the car windows, blurring the view of the modest craftsman-style house with cheerful yellow trim. "Wait here," Robert instructed his driver, then stepped out into the rain without bothering with an umbrella. By the time he reached Sophia's front porch, his tailored suit was soaked through, water dripping from his silver-streaked hair into his eyes. The daisies in his hand already looked slightly wilted, a pathetic peace offering at best. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What right did he have to be here? Their contract had been fulfilled. She had given him Grace, his beautiful daughter, now 6 months old. Sophia had walked away with her payment as agreed. No strings, no contact. Those had been his terms. Before he could retreat, the porch light flickered on, and the door opened. Sophia stood in the doorway, her chestnut hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. "Robert, what are you doing here?" He stood there, dripping on her welcome mat, the once immaculate CEO of Sterling Innovations reduced to a sodden, desperate man clutching drooping flowers. "I saw the pictures," he said, his voice rough. "You and Dr. Whitaker, at the Children's Hospital benefit." Sophia's expression shifted, something unreadable crossing her features. "You're checking up on me?" "No. Yes. I don't know." He ran a hand through his wet hair. "May I come in? Please." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "You're soaking wet. At least dry off before you leave." Relief washed over him as he entered her home for the first time. It was everything his penthouse wasn't warm, lived in, filled with books and photographs and colorful throw pillows. A home with a soul. "How's Grace?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral as she handed him a towel. "Is she with your sister tonight?" The question revealed both her care and her distance. She knew nothing of his daughter's life now, as per their agreement. "She's with the nanny," Robert said, running the towel over his hair. She's perfect, Sophia. She smiles all the time now. And she's starting to sit up on her own. Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, longing, perhaps, before she masked it. I'm glad to hear that. I shouldn't have come, Robert said, suddenly aware of his intrusion. I don't have the right. No, Sophia agreed quietly. You don't. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. Robert looked around the cozy living room, noting the framed photos on the mantel, Sophia with her mother and brother, with a group of children who must have been former students, and one that made his heart clench. Sophia in the hospital holding newborn Grace, her expression a complex mixture of joy and sorrow. She had kept a photo of Grace. Despite everything, despite the contract, despite the clean break, she had kept a reminder of the child she had carried but not raised. Why are you really here, Robert? Sophia asked, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. I miss you, he admitted, the words inadequate but honest. Every day, when Grace does something new, my first thought is always that I wish you were there to see it. The penthouse feels empty without you. I feel empty without you. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, as if his words caused her physical pain. Robert, I made a mistake, he interrupted, the confession bursting from him like water through a broken dam. The contract, the terms, the clean break, all of it. I thought I could control everything, keep emotions out of it, but I couldn't. I can't. You can't just decide you want me back in your life and expect me to drop everything, Sophia said, her voice tight with emotion. That's not how this works. That's not how I work. I know, he acknowledged. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but Grace deserves to know her mother. And he swallowed hard. I deserve to live honestly for once. To admit that I love you and want you in our lives, permanently. Sophia's eyes widened at his declaration. Love? You never once mentioned that word when we were living together, preparing for Grace's birth. Not once, Robert. I was afraid, he admitted. After Claire died, I built walls around myself, convinced that control was safer than connection. By the time I realized what was happening between us, what I was feeling, it seemed too late to change the terms. So what's different now? Sophia asked, her voice steady but her eyes revealing her inner turmoil. I've had 6 months of raising our daughter without you, Robert said simply. 6 months of seeing your smile in her face, of feeling your absence in every room of that penthouse. And then I saw that photo of you with Dr. Whitaker, and I realized I might lose you forever if I didn't finally tell you the truth. The truth being that you're jealous? Sophia challenged. The truth being that I love you, Robert corrected. Yes, I'm jealous. Insanely, irrationally jealous of a man I've never met. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I can't bear the thought of you not knowing how I feel, even if it's too late. Sophia turned away, moving to the window to watch the rain. Jim is a good man, she said quietly. He understands what I've been through. His wife died when his daughter was 2. He knows what it's like to raise a child alone, to feel like a piece of your heart is missing. Each word was like a knife. Sophia had moved on, found someone who understood her in ways Robert hadn't tried to. Do you love him? He asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. We've only been dating a few months, she said, which wasn't really an answer. He's kind, thoughtful. His daughter, Emma, is adorable. We're taking things slowly. But do you love him? Robert pressed. Sophia met his gaze directly. I'm trying to, she said softly, because loving you hurt too much. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Robert wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms, but he restrained himself. He had no right, not yet. I want to see Grace, Sophia said suddenly, if that's possible. Not to confuse her or complicate things, just, I need to see her, to know she's okay. Of course, Robert said immediately. Anytime. She's your daughter too, Sophia. She always has been. Sophia nodded, blinking back tears. I should probably ask you to leave now. It's getting late. And I have plans with Jim tomorrow. The casual mention of her plans with another man stung, but Robert nodded. I understand. Thank you for listening, for not slamming the door in my face. I deserved that at the very least. As he turned to go, Sophia called after him, Robert. When he looked back, she added, leave your number, for when I'm ready to see Grace. It wasn't much, but it was something. A crack in the door that had seemed firmly closed. I meant what I said, Robert told her, pausing at the threshold. I love you, Sophia. That won't change, no matter what you decide. She didn't respond, just gave him a small, sad smile before closing the door behind him. Robert stood on the porch for a moment longer, the rain still falling steadily around him, the rejected daisies still clutched in his hand. He had said his piece, laid his heart bare. Now all he could do was wait and hope that it wasn't too late for the family he should have fought for months ago. If you've ever had to swallow your pride and fight for a second chance with someone you love, hit that like button and share this video with a sister who needs to hear that sometimes love requires courage and vulnerability. 3 days passed with no word from Sophia. Robert threw himself into work during the day and spent his evenings with Grace, trying not to check his phone every 5 minutes, trying not to imagine Sophia with Dr. Jim Whitaker, building the kind of warm, loving relationship Robert had been too afraid to pursue. On the 4th day, as he was reviewing quarterly projections in his home office while Grace napped nearby, his phone buzzed with a text message. I'd like to see Grace tomorrow, if that's convenient. Sophia. Robert's heart raced as he read and reread the simple message. She wanted to see Grace. It was a start. Of course, he replied. Would you prefer to come to the penthouse, or should I bring her to you? The response came quickly. The penthouse would be fine. 2 p.m. Perfect. We'll be here. Robert spent the next 24 hours in a state of nervous anticipation, ensuring the penthouse was immaculate, that Grace's nursery was perfect, that everything was ready for Sophia's return, however temporary it might be. When the elevator chimed, announcing Sophia's arrival, Robert's heart raced with an anxiety he hadn't felt since his first major business presentation decades ago. This mattered more than any deal, any acquisition, any corporate triumph. Sophia stepped into the penthouse, looking both familiar and strange, like coming home and visiting somewhere new simultaneously. She wore simple jeans and a blue blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She carried a small gift bag. Hi, she said, her eyes immediately finding Grace in Robert's arms. Oh, look at her. She's so big. 6 months yesterday, Robert confirmed, moving closer so Sophia could see Grace better. Grace, this is Sophia. Can you say hello? Grace, in typical baby fashion, chose that moment to bury her face shyly against her father's shoulder, peeking out with one curious eye at the newcomer. Sophia laughed, the sound warming the room. She's a little cautious, like her father. Would you like to hold her? Robert asked. Sophia nodded, setting down her purse and the gift bag. When Robert transferred Grace into her arms, the baby stiffened momentarily, then relaxed, studying Sophia's face with solemn interest. Hello, beautiful girl, Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I've missed you so much. Grace reached up, her tiny fingers touching Sophia's cheek with innocent curiosity. Then, as if recognizing something essential, she broke into a radiant smile, the same one that had been melting Robert's heart for months. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She does have my smile, she said wonderingly. I told you, Robert replied softly. She's yours in all the ways that matter. They moved to the living room, where Robert had set up Grace's play mat and favorite toys. As Sophia sat on the floor with Grace, helping her stack colorful blocks only to laugh when the baby knocked them down again, Robert was struck by how right it felt. The three of them together, a family in every sense but the legal one. She's amazing, Robert, Sophia said, watching as Grace determinedly pushed herself up, practicing the crawling position she hadn't quite mastered. You're doing a wonderful job with her. I'm trying, he admitted. It hasn't been easy. The nanny helps during the day while I'm at work, but evenings and weekends are just us. I've learned more about baby sleep patterns and developmental milestones than I ever thought possible. Sophia smiled. I always knew you'd be a good father. You just needed to let yourself be vulnerable enough to try. The observation was astute, cutting to the heart of the transformation Robert had undergone since Grace's birth. Fatherhood had forced him to lower his defenses, to prioritize connection over control, to embrace the messy, unpredictable nature of loving another human being completely. I have something for her, Sophia said, reaching for the gift bag she'd brought. Inside was a handmade quilt, small enough for a baby but crafted with obvious care and skill. I made it during these past months. It helped to feel connected to her somehow. Robert touched the quilt gently, noting the intricate pattern of stars and moons against a deep blue background. It's beautiful. Thank you. My grandmother taught me to quilt when I was a girl, Sophia explained, spreading the blanket on the floor for Grace to explore. She said every stitch carries a wish for the person it's made for. What did you wish for Grace? Robert asked softly. Sophia's eyes met his, vulnerable and honest. That she would always feel loved. That she would grow up knowing her worth isn't measured by achievements or possessions, but by the capacity of her heart. The words hung between them, laden with meaning that extended beyond their daughter to the complicated feelings between them. Sophia, Robert began, about what I said at your house. Not now, she interrupted gently. Today is about Grace, about me getting to know her. The rest, we can talk about that another time. Robert nodded, respecting her boundaries even as hope flickered in his chest. Another time meant there would be more visits, more conversations. It wasn't a rejection. They spent the afternoon focused on Grace, feeding her, playing with her, taking turns holding her when she grew tired. Sophia asked countless questions about Grace's routine, her preferences, her development, absorbing every detail with the attentiveness of a mother who had missed precious months of her child's life. As the afternoon waned, Grace finally succumbed to sleep in Sophia's arms, her tiny hand clutching a fold of Sophia's blouse as if afraid she might disappear. I should put her down for her nap, Robert said reluctantly, not wanting to break the peaceful tableau before him. Sophia nodded, carefully rising with Grace still nestled against her. Show me where. He led her to the nursery, watching as she gently laid Grace in her crib, tucking the new quilt around her with practiced tenderness. They stood side by side for a moment, watching their daughter sleep, connected by the profound love they both felt for this tiny human they had created together. One through biology, both through love. Thank you for today, Sophia said as they returned to the living room. For letting me see her, hold her. You don't need to thank me, Robert replied. She's your daughter too. You have every right to be part of her life. Sophia gathered her purse, preparing to leave. I should go. Jim is picking me up for dinner at 7. The mention of Dr. Whitaker was like a bucket of cold water, reminding Robert that Sophia's life now included another man, one who might offer her the kind of relationship Robert had been too afraid to pursue. Of course, he said, struggling to keep his voice neutral. Would you like to see Grace again? Yes, Sophia answered without hesitation. If that's all right with you. Anytime, Robert assured her. My door is always open to you, Sophia. Always has been. She gave him a measured look. That's not entirely true, is it? There was a time when you wanted very clear boundaries. No strings attached. A clean break. I was wrong, he admitted simply. About so many things. As he walked her to the elevator, Robert fought the urge to ask about her relationship with Jim, to demand to know if she was falling in love with him, to beg her to give them, him and Grace, a chance instead. But he had no right to make such demands, not after the way he had insisted on their separation. Goodbye, Robert, Sophia said as the elevator doors opened. I'll call about arranging another visit. Sophia, he said impulsively, unable to let her go without saying something of what was in his heart. I meant what I said the other night. All of it. She held his gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I know you did. That's what makes this so complicated. With that enigmatic response, She stepped into the elevator and was gone, leaving Robert with a mixture of hope and dread. She hadn't rejected his declaration of love outright, but neither had she reciprocated it. And she was still seeing Jim Whittaker, still building a life that didn't include Robert. Over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. Sophia visited the penthouse twice a week to spend time with Grace. Sometimes the visits were brief, an hour squeezed between her volunteer work and other commitments. Sometimes they stretched longer, especially on weekends when Robert would take Grace to the park or the Children's Museum, with Sophia accompanying them like the family they almost were. They carefully avoided discussing Robert's feelings or Sophia's relationship with Jim, focusing instead on Grace and her rapidly developing personality. But the unspoken emotions between them created a tension that grew with each visit, a sense of possibilities unrealized, of words unsaid. Then, 2 months after Sophia's first visit to the penthouse, Robert received an invitation that made his blood run cold. The annual gala for the Children's Literacy Foundation, where Sophia volunteered, the same organization where she had met Jim Whittaker. The invitation included a note mentioning that Dr. Whittaker would be receiving an award for his work establishing reading programs in pediatric wards across the city. Robert's first instinct was to decline. The thought of watching Sophia with Jim, perhaps sitting at his table, applauding his accomplishments, was more than he could bear. But then he reconsidered. If he didn't attend, he was essentially conceding defeat, accepting that Sophia had moved on with a man who, by all accounts, was making significant contributions to causes she cared about deeply. The night of the gala, Robert left Grace with Catherine, dressed in his finest tuxedo, and arrived at the elegant downtown hotel with uncharacteristic nervousness. The ballroom was already crowded with Chicago's philanthropic elite, champagne flowing freely as attendees mingled before dinner. He spotted Sophia immediately, as if his eyes were drawn to her by some magnetic force. She stood near the stage, engaged in conversation with an older couple. She wore a stunning emerald gown that highlighted the graceful curve of her neck, the elegant line of her back. She looked beautiful, confident, at ease in this world of education and philanthropy in a way she never quite had in his corporate sphere. And beside her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back in a gesture of casual intimacy, stood Dr. Jim Whittaker. Robert had seen photos of the man, but in person, he was even more impressive, tall and distinguished, with salt and pepper hair and an air of quiet authority. He looked like the kind of man who saved children's lives by day and read poetry by night. The kind of man who would treat a woman like Sophia with the respect and care she deserved. The jealousy that surged through Robert was so intense it nearly took his breath away. But mixed with it was something else, a grudging respect. Jim Whittaker wasn't some playboy trying to impress Sophia with wealth or status. He was a dedicated physician, a widowed father, a man who shared Sophia's commitment to education and children's welfare. In short, he was worthy competition. As Robert made his way through the crowd, accepting greetings from acquaintances and business associates, he kept Sophia and Jim in his peripheral vision. They moved together with easy familiarity, talking and laughing as they worked the room. They looked right together. Perfect match. When dinner was announced, Robert found himself seated at a table far from Sophia's, a small mercy that spared him from watching her and Jim up close throughout the meal. But during the awards presentation, he had a clear view as Jim was called to the stage to accept his honor. Dr. Whittaker's innovative reading program has transformed the experience of hospitalized children across Chicago, the foundation director announced. But perhaps even more impressive is his personal commitment to each child in the program. As one parent told us, Dr. Whittaker doesn't just heal bodies, he nurtures souls. The audience applauded enthusiastically as Jim took the stage, his acceptance speech humble and focused on the children he served rather than his own accomplishments. Robert watched Sophia's face as she listened, noting the pride and admiration in her expression. It was the look of a woman falling in love. The realization hit Robert with the force of a physical blow. He had waited too long, said too little. While he had been hiding behind contracts and clean breaks, Jim Whittaker had been brave enough to open his heart to Sophia, to show her the kind of man he truly was through actions rather than words. After the ceremony, As guests mingled over dessert and coffee, Robert found himself at the bar, nursing a scotch and contemplating a graceful exit. He had seen enough. More than enough. Mr. Sterling. Robert turned to find Jim Whittaker standing beside him, hand extended in greeting. Dr. Whittaker, he replied, shaking the offered hand with more force than necessary. Congratulations on your award. Thank you. Jim's gaze was direct, assessing. I understand you're Grace's father. The simple statement, delivered without judgment or hostility, caught Robert off guard. Yes, Sophia has mentioned me? Of course. Jim signaled the bartender for a drink. She speaks very highly of you, actually. Says you're an excellent father. Robert wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected civility from the man he'd been mentally casting as his rival. Sophia is important to Grace, he said carefully. To both of us. Jim nodded, accepting his drink from the bartender. She's an extraordinary woman. The work she's doing with our reading program is transforming lives. That sounds like Sophia, Robert agreed. She has a gift for seeing potential in others. A moment of understanding passed between them, two men who recognized the same exceptional qualities in the woman they both cared for. She's been through a lot, Jim said, his tone more personal now. The surrogacy, giving up Grace, starting over. It takes remarkable strength to navigate that kind of emotional terrain. Robert stiffened slightly. She told you about our arrangement? She's been very open about it, Jim confirmed. I believe in honesty as the foundation of any relationship. The implication was clear. Jim and Sophia had a relationship, one built on the kind of openness and vulnerability that Robert had avoided. As do I, Robert said, though the words felt hollow given his history with Sophia. Now, Jim studied him for a moment, then said quietly, she still loves you, you know? The words hit Robert like an electric shock. She told you that? She didn't have to. Jim's expression was resigned but dignified. It's in her eyes when she talks about you, in the way she lights up after spending time with Grace. And with you. I don't understand, Robert said, genuinely confused. If you know she has feelings for me, why are you pursuing her? Jim smiled slightly. Because she's worth fighting for. And because I believe people should make choices based on what's in front of them, not what might have been. Before Robert could respond, Sophia appeared beside them, her expression wary as she took in the two men in conversation. Everything all right here? She asked, her gaze moving between them. Just getting acquainted, Jim assured her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mr. Sterling was telling me about Grace's recent milestones. The easy lie, offered to spare Sophia any awkwardness, increased Robert's grudging respect for the man. She's trying to crawl, Sophia said, her face lighting up with maternal pride. She gets up on her hands and knees and rocks back and forth, but hasn't quite figured out how to move forward yet. She'll get there, Jim said warmly. Emma was the same way at her age. One day she just took off across the living room floor, and we could barely keep up with her after that. The casual reference to his daughter, the shared parenting wisdom, the easy way he included Sophia in the we. It all painted a picture of the future Sophia might have with Jim, a ready-made family, a partner who understood the joys and challenges of raising a child, a man who wasn't afraid to love openly. I should be going, Robert said abruptly. Early meeting tomorrow. Of course, Sophia replied, a flicker of disappointment crossing her features. Will you still bring Grace to the park on Saturday? She loves the swings. Yes, of course, Robert assured her. We'll meet you there at 10. As he turned to leave, Jim extended his hand once more. It was good to finally meet you, Mr. Sterling. I've heard so much about you. Robert shook his hand, meeting the other man's gaze directly. Likewise, Dr. Whittaker. The exchange was cordial, respectful, two gentlemen acknowledging each other as worthy adversaries in the most important contest of their lives. As Robert drove home that night, his thoughts were in turmoil. Jim's words echoed in his mind. She still loves you. If that was true, why was she building a relationship with another man? Why hadn't she responded to Robert's declaration of love? The answer came to him with painful clarity. Because words weren't enough. Not after months of emotional distance. Not after a contract that had prioritized clean breaks over human connection. Not after he had let her walk away without fighting for her. If he wanted Sophia back, truly wanted her as part of his life, part of Grace's life, he would need to prove it through actions, not just declarations. He would need to show her beyond any doubt that he had changed, that he understood what truly mattered, that he was capable of the kind of love and commitment she deserved. And he would need to do it soon, before she made a choice that couldn't be undone. If you've ever had to prove your love through actions, not just words, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that sometimes we have to fight for the relationships that matter most. The opportunity came sooner than Robert expected. The following Tuesday, as he was reviewing contracts in his home office while Grace napped, his phone rang with Sophia's number. "Sophia," he answered immediately. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, fine," she assured him, though her voice sounded strained. "I was wondering if I could see Grace today instead of Thursday? Something's come up, and I need to reschedule." "Of course," Robert said without hesitation. "What time works for you? Could I come by around 4? I know it's short notice." "4 is perfect," he interrupted. "Grace will be up from her nap by then." "Thank you, Robert." There was genuine relief in her voice. "I'll see you both then." When Sophia arrived that afternoon, Robert immediately sensed something was wrong. Though she smiled and greeted Grace with her usual warmth, there was a tension in her shoulders, a distraction in her gaze that suggested her mind was elsewhere. "Is everything all right?" he asked as they sat in the living room, watching Grace play with her favorite stuffed animals. Sophia hesitated, then sighed. "Jim asked me to move in with him last night." The words hit Robert like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. "I see. And what did you tell him?" "That I needed time to think." She met his gaze directly. "It's a big step. For me, for him, for his daughter Emma. And for Grace," Robert added quietly. "For us." Sophia nodded, acknowledging the unspoken implications. If she moved in with Jim, it would signal a level of commitment that would change everything. Her relationship with Grace, her feelings for Robert, the tentative family they had been building during her visits. "He's a good man," Robert said, the words costing him dearly but necessary. "I met him at the gala. He clearly cares for you." "He does," Sophia agreed. "He's kind, thoughtful, stable. Emma adores him, and she's taken to me as well. We could have a good life together." "But," Robert prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But," Sophia continued, her eyes finding Grace as she played contentedly on the floor. "There's Grace, and there's you, and there's this complicated history we share that doesn't fit neatly into any conventional relationship category." Robert's heart raced at her words. She was acknowledging that what existed between them was more than just a business arrangement, more than just co-parenting. It was something deeper, more complex, harder to walk away from. "What does Jim say about Grace?" he asked carefully. "About your relationship with her?" "He's been supportive," Sophia said. "He understands how important she is to me, says he's willing to work around my visits with her. But it would be complicated," Robert finished for her. "Living with one man while maintaining a connection to the child you share with another." Sophia nodded, relief in her eyes at his understanding. "Exactly. And it's not just about logistics. It's about emotions, about divided loyalties, about what's best for Grace in the long run." Robert took a deep breath, knowing that what he said next could change everything. "Sophia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She met his gaze, wariness in her expression. "All right. Do you love him?" The question hung between them, direct and unavoidable. Sophia looked away, her fingers absently straightening the edge of Grace's play blanket. "I care for him deeply," she said finally. "He makes me feel valued, respected. We share the same values, the same passion for education and children's welfare. He's everything I should want." "That's not what I asked," Robert pressed gently. Sophia's eyes met his again, vulnerable and honest. "I'm not in love with him," she admitted quietly. "Not yet. I think I could be, given time. But what? But my heart is still tangled up with you," she whispered, the confession clearly costing her. "With Grace. With what might have been if things had been different." Robert's pulse quickened at her words, hope surging through him. "Things can be different," he said earnestly. "They already are. I'm not the same man who drafted that contract, who insisted on no strings attached. These past months without you, raising Grace alone, they've changed me." "Words are easy, Robert," Sophia said, though her tone was gentle rather than accusatory. "Actions are what matter." "You're right," he acknowledged, "and I haven't given you enough evidence that I've truly changed, that I understand what matters now." He moved from his chair to kneel beside her on the floor, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, but not touching her. "Not yet. Give me a chance to show you," he said softly. "Not just tell you, but prove to you that I understand what I almost lost, what I'm still at risk of losing if I don't fight for it." Sophia studied his face, searching for something in his expression. "What exactly are you asking for, Robert?" "Time," he said simply. "Before you make your decision about Jim, give me 2 weeks to show you what our life could be like together. You, me, and Grace. A real family, not a business arrangement." "And if, after those 2 weeks, I still choose Jim?" she challenged. "Then I'll respect your decision," Robert promised, though the words felt like glass in his throat. "I'll continue to welcome you in Grace's life, however you want to be involved, and I'll be civil to Jim for her sake. But I need to know I did everything possible to show you what we could have together before I let you go." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from Robert to Grace and back again. 2 weeks, she said finally. "Starting when?" "Now," Robert said without hesitation. "Today. Cancel your plans for the next 2 weeks. Stay here in the penthouse. See what it would be like if we were a real family." Sophia's eyes widened. "You want me to move back in? Just like that?" "Not into your old suite," Robert clarified. "That was part of our business arrangement. I'm talking about something completely different. Something real." "Where would I stay?" she asked, practical even in this emotional moment. "We have 4 guest rooms," Robert reminded her. "Choose any one you like. This isn't about physical intimacy. It's about showing you that I can be the man you deserve, the father Grace deserves, that we can build something lasting together." Sophia bit her lip, clearly torn. "I would need to talk to Jim. Explain." "Of course," Robert agreed, though the thought of her conversation with Jim made his stomach clench with jealousy and fear. "Take all the time you need. But please, Sophia, give us this chance." Grace chose that moment to crawl over to them, pulling herself up on Sophia's knee and offering her a slightly drooled upon stuffed elephant. The gesture, so innocent and trusting, seemed to tip the scales. "All right," Sophia said, accepting the elephant with a soft smile for Grace. 2 weeks. But I need to be clear about something, Robert." "Anything," he promised. "I'm not choosing between you and Jim," she said firmly. "I'm choosing what's best for me, for my future. If that includes you and Grace, it will be because we've built something real and lasting, not because you've won some competition." "Understood," Robert said, humbled by her clarity and strength. "This isn't about beating Jim. It's about showing you who I really am now, who we could be together." As Sophia left to pack some belongings and have her difficult conversation with Jim, Robert felt a mixture of hope and terror. He had 2 weeks to prove that he had truly changed, that he understood what mattered, that he could offer Sophia the kind of love and partnership she deserved. 2 weeks to win back the family he should have fought for from the beginning. The first few days of their 2-week experiment were awkward, both of them hyper-aware of each other's presence in the penthouse. Sophia chose the guest room furthest from Robert's master suite, establishing a clear physical boundary between them. They were polite, careful, circling each other like wary dancers unsure of the steps. But Grace provided a natural focus for their interactions, a bridge between past and potential future. Together, they established a routine: morning walks in the park, afternoon playtime, evening baths, and bedtime stories. Robert rearranged his work schedule to be home by 5 each day, prioritizing family time over business obligations for perhaps the first time in his career. On the fourth night, as they sat together on the living room floor after putting Grace to bed, Robert finally asked the question that had been weighing on him. "How did Jim take it? Your decision to stay here for 2 weeks?" Sophia looked up from the book she'd been reading, her expression thoughtful. As well as could be expected. He was hurt, confused. "Asked if I was choosing you over him. What did you tell him?" Robert couldn't help asking. "The truth," she said simply. "That I needed to be sure about my feelings before moving forward with him. That I owed it to myself, to him, and to Grace to be absolutely certain." "And he accepted that?" Sophia smiled slightly. "He's a good man, Robert. He said he wants me to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include him. But he also made it clear that he won't wait forever, that he deserves someone who chooses him wholeheartedly." "He's right," Robert acknowledged, surprising himself with his honesty. "You both deserve that certainty." A comfortable silence fell between them, more relaxed than any they'd shared since Sophia's return to the penthouse. "Tell me about your day," Sophia said suddenly. "Your work. You never used to talk about it much, even when we lived together before." The request surprised him. During their original arrangement, he had deliberately kept his work life separate from their living situation, maintaining professional distance. Now he found himself eager to share this part of himself with her. "We're developing a new educational technology platform," he told her, warming to the subject. "Interactive learning tools for children with different learning styles. The prototype testing has been promising." "That sounds amazing," Sophia said, genuine interest in her voice. "Is this a new direction for Sterling Innovations?" "Yes and no," Robert explained. "We've always been in tech, but this is our first major venture into educational applications. It's something I've been wanting to explore for years, but never prioritized until recently." "What changed?" she asked. Robert met her gaze directly. "Grace. Becoming a father. Thinking about the kind of world I want her to grow up in, the kind of company I want to leave her. And," he added softly, your passion for teaching, for reaching every child. It made me see possibilities I hadn't considered before." Sophia's expression softened at his words. "I'd love to hear more about it. Maybe even offer some input from an educator's perspective, if that would be helpful." "I'd like that," Robert said, meaning it completely. The idea of sharing his work with Sophia, of valuing her professional expertise, of building something meaningful together beyond their connection through Grace. It felt right in a way he hadn't anticipated. As the days passed, the awkwardness between them gradually dissolved, replaced by a deepening connection that felt both familiar and entirely new. They cooked dinner together, shared stories from their childhoods, discussed books and films and current events. Robert found himself laughing more than he had in years, rediscovering the simple joy of conversation with someone who challenged and understood him. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the sunset over Lake Michigan, Grace asleep in her nursery, Robert found the courage to ask the question that had been haunting him. "Why did you leave? After Grace was born. You could have stayed at least for a while." The contract didn't specify an immediate departure. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I was afraid," she admitted finally. "Afraid of how much I already loved Grace. Afraid of how much I was beginning to care for you. Afraid that if I stayed even one day longer than necessary, I wouldn't have the strength to leave at all." "And that would have been so terrible?" Robert asked softly. "It would have been devastating," Sophia corrected him, meeting his gaze directly. "To stay, to love you both more deeply with each passing day, only to be reminded constantly that I was just the surrogate. Not Grace's mother in any legal sense. Not your partner in any meaningful way. Just a woman who had fulfilled her contract and overstayed her welcome." The pain in her voice cut through Robert like a knife. "I never saw you that way," he protested. "Never. Didn't you? Sophia challenged gently. You wrote that contract, Robert. You insisted on the clean break, the no strings attached. You made it very clear from the beginning that I was providing a service, nothing more. I was wrong, he said simply. So wrong. About everything that mattered. Sophia's expression softened at his admission. We both made choices based on what we thought we needed at the time. I needed the money for my mother's medical bills. You needed an heir without emotional complications. Neither of us expected this. This, Robert prompted, needing to hear her define what had grown between them. This connection, she said softly. This feeling that somehow, despite everything, we became a family. The word family hung between them, precious and fragile. Robert reached across the space separating them, taking Sophia's hand in his. She didn't pull away. We are a family, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The three of us, if you want us to be. Sophia's fingers tightened around his, but she didn't answer. Not yet. And Robert understood that after everything, she needed more than words. She needed time, certainty, proof that what he offered was real and lasting. As their 2 weeks together neared its end, Robert planned one final gesture to show Sophia exactly what she meant to him, what kind of future they could build together. While she took Grace for her regular checkup with the pediatrician, he set his plan in motion, making calls, arranging details, ensuring everything would be perfect. When Sophia returned with Grace that afternoon, Robert was waiting in the living room, dressed more casually than she was accustomed to seeing him. Jeans and a simple button-down shirt rather than his usual business attire. How was the appointment? He asked, taking Grace from her arms and kissing his daughter's chubby cheek. Perfect, Sophia reported with a proud smile. Dr. Chun says she's developing right on schedule. Her weight and height are excellent, and she's hitting all her milestones. That's our girl, Robert said. The casual are no longer feeling strange or forced. It was simply the truth. Grace was theirs in heart if not in legal documentation. I have a surprise for you both. Can you be ready to leave in 30 minutes? Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Leave for where? It's a surprise, Robert repeated with a smile. Dress comfortably. We'll be outdoors. 30 minutes later, they were in Robert's car, Grace securely fastened in her car seat, heading north out of the city. Sophia watched the urban landscape give way to suburbs, then to more rural scenery, curiosity evident in her expression. Are you kidnapping us? She teased as they turned onto a country road lined with mature trees. Maybe, Robert replied with a smile. Would that be so terrible? Depends on the accommodations, she shot back, the easy banter between them a testament to how far they'd come. Finally, Robert turned down a long driveway that led to a charming farmhouse nestled among ancient oak trees. The house was white with dark green shutters, a wide porch wrapping around the front, flower gardens blooming in a riot of color. Robert, Sophia breathed, taking in the idyllic scene. What is this place? It's a farm that's been in my family for generations, he explained as he parked in front of the house. My grandparents lived here. After they passed, my parents maintained it as a weekend retreat. When they died, it came to me and Catherine. We've kept it up, but neither of us has spent much time here in recent years. He helped Sophia out of the car, then retrieved Grace from her car seat. Together, they walked up the path to the porch, where Robert retrieved a key from under a flower pot. A charmingly old-fashioned gesture that seemed at odds with his usual high-tech security measures. Inside, the house was exactly as Sophia might have imagined a beloved family home would be. Comfortable furniture worn smooth with use, bookshelves filled with well-read volumes, photographs covering the walls. It was the antithesis of Robert's sleek, impersonal penthouse. It's beautiful, Sophia said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. So warm and inviting. This is where I spent my summers as a boy, Robert told her, setting Grace down on a colorful rug where toys had been thoughtfully arranged. Fishing in the pond with my grandfather, helping my grandmother in her garden, reading for hours on that window seat. Some of my happiest memories were made here. Sophia moved to the wall of photographs, studying the images of a younger Robert. A serious boy with a book, a teenager proudly holding up a fish, a college graduate with his beaming parents. "You look happy," she observed. "More carefree than I would have imagined." "I was," Robert acknowledged, "before ambition and success became my primary focus. Before I convinced myself that control was more important than connection." He joined her at the wall, pointing to a photo of an elderly couple on the porch. "My grandparents, married 62 years. They taught me what real partnership looks like, though it took me far too long to appreciate the lesson." Sophia turned to him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Why did you bring us here, Robert?" "Because this is who I really am," he said simply. "Not the CEO in the penthouse with the prenuptial agreements and surrogate contracts. This place, these memories, this is my foundation, my true self. And I wanted you to see it, to understand where I come from and who I want to be again." He took her hand, leading her through the house to the kitchen, where a picnic basket sat on the old wooden table. "I thought we could have lunch by the pond. This Grace's first visit to her family home. We should make it special." The casual reference to family home wasn't lost on Sophia. Her eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of calculation or manipulation. Finding none, she nodded. "That sounds perfect." They spent the afternoon by the pond, spreading a blanket under a massive oak tree, watching Grace delight in the new sensations of grass between her fingers and dappled sunlight through the leaves. They talked easily, sharing memories and hopes, the conversation flowing naturally between past and future. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting golden light across the water, Robert knew it was time for the final part of his plan. He reached into the picnic basket and retrieved a small velvet box. "Sophia," he began, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "These past 2 weeks have shown me what our life could be together. But this place, this farm, has reminded me of who I truly am, who I want to be for you and for Grace." He opened the velvet box, revealing not a ring as might be expected, but a small golden key. "This isn't a proposal," he clarified, seeing the surprise in her eyes. "Not yet. That would be presumptuous after everything we've been through. This is a promise and an invitation." He held out the key to her. "This farm has been in my family for generations. I've had the deed modified to include your name alongside mine and Grace's. No matter what you decide about us, about our future together, this place will always belong to you too. A home where Grace can grow up knowing her roots, where you will always have a place that's truly yours." Sophia stared at the key, then at Robert, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You're giving me part ownership of your family home? Why?" "Because you are family," he said simply. "You're Grace's mother in every way that matters. And because I want you to know that this isn't conditional on your feelings for me. It's yours, regardless of whether you choose a future with me or with Jim or on your own." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she understood the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just property, but unconditional acceptance. Recognition of her place in Grace's life that went beyond legal documents or temporary arrangements. "There's more," Robert continued, setting the key in her palm and closing her fingers around it. "I've had my lawyers draw up adoption papers. If you want, you can legally become Grace's mother. Again, this isn't conditional on anything else. It's simply recognizing what's already true in our hearts." A tear slipped down Sophia's cheek. "Robert, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he assured her. "These past 2 weeks were about showing you what's possible, not pressuring you into a decision. Take all the time you need." Grace crawled over to them then, pulling herself up on Sophia's knee and babbling happily, oblivious to the emotional moment unfolding between the adults. Sophia gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her dark curls. "And what about us?" she asked softly, meeting Robert's gaze over their daughter's head. "What are you offering there?" "Everything," he said without hesitation. "My heart, my trust, my future. A true partnership, not a business arrangement. The chance to build something lasting together. A family, a home, a life." But only if that's what you want to. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Grace's hair as she gazed out over the pond. The setting sun painted the water gold and crimson, a perfect backdrop for the most important conversation of their lives. When I signed that contract, she said finally, I thought I was just solving a financial problem, helping my mother, securing my brother's education, doing something good for a man who wanted a child. I never expected to fall in love with Grace, with this possibility of family. With you. Robert's heart soared at her words, but he remained silent, letting her continue. These past months without you both have been harder than I ever imagined, she admitted. I tried to move on, to build a new life. Jim is a wonderful man. In another world, another time, perhaps we could have been happy together. But, Robert prompted gently when she paused. Sophia turned to him, her eyes clear and certain. But my heart has always been here with Grace. With you. Even when I was angry with you for those contract terms. Even when I was trying to convince myself that a clean break was possible, I knew the truth. Which is? Robert asked, hardly daring to hope. That we're already a family, she said simply. We have been since that first ultrasound when we heard Grace's heartbeat together. Everything since then, the contract, the separation, even these past 2 weeks, has just been us figuring out how to accept what was already true. Robert reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Does that mean? It means yes, Sophia said, a smile breaking through her tears. Yes to the adoption papers. Yes to this farm. Yes to us building a life together, not because of a contract or an arrangement, but because it's what we all need. What we all deserve. Relief and joy washed over Robert in equal measure. He leaned forward, his free hand gently cupping Sophia's cheek. May I? He whispered. Her answer was to close the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Grace giggled between them, patting their faces with her tiny hands as if blessing their union. When they finally broke apart, Robert rested his forehead against Sophia's, unwilling to move too far from her. I love you, he said softly. I should have told you months ago, before Grace was born, before you left. I was a coward, hiding behind contracts and clean breaks because I was afraid of losing someone I loved again. And now, Sophia asked, her eyes searching his. Now I know that loving someone means taking that risk, he said. That real family isn't about control or perfect arrangements. It's about choosing each other every day, through all the messiness and uncertainty of life. Sophia smiled, the expression transforming her already beautiful face into something radiant. I love you too, Robert Sterling, despite your contracts and control issues and corporate CEO facade. I deserve that, he acknowledged with a rueful smile. But I'm working on it. Yes, you are, she agreed, kissing him again briefly. And that's why I'm choosing you, because the man you're becoming is even more impressive than the empire you've built. As the sun set over the pond, casting long shadows across the grass, the three of them remained on the blanket, Grace now dozing between them, their hands still linked, the golden key to their shared future glinting in the fading light. There's one more thing, Robert said after a comfortable silence. I need to call Catherine and tell her she was right. She's never going to let me hear the end of it. Sophia laughed, the sound carrying across the water like music. Some things are worth a little sisterly gloating. You're worth everything, Robert replied, his voice sincere despite the lightness of the moment. The gloating, the risk, the vulnerability. Everything. As darkness fell, they gathered their sleeping daughter and their picnic things, walking hand in hand back to the farmhouse that would become their weekend home. Their retreat from the city, the place where Grace would learn to swim and ride a bike and climb trees. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten, replaced by something far more binding and meaningful. A family built not on legal terms and conditions, but on love, trust, and the courage to choose each other, strings and all. 6 months later, on a perfect summer day, Sophia Anderson became Sophia Sterling in a simple ceremony on the farm. Grace, now walking and babbling a few recognizable words, served as their flower girl, toddling down the aisle with assistance from Catherine. Jim Whittaker attended with his daughter Emma, his genuine good wishes for the couple a testament to his character. He had found his own happiness with a fellow doctor at the hospital, proving that sometimes letting go of one possibility opens the door to another. As Robert and Sophia exchanged vows under the ancient oak tree by the pond, the words they spoke were not about ownership or control, but about partnership and growth, about building a family based on love rather than obligation. From a contract to a covenant, Robert said in his vows, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. From no strings attached to bound together by choice. You've taught me that the most precious things in life can't be controlled or purchased. They can only be given freely, received gratefully, and cherished completely. Sophia, radiant in a simple lace gown, squeezed his hands as she responded. You offered me a business arrangement, but what we found was a family, a home, a love that transcends legal documents and careful terms. I choose you, Robert Sterling, not because of what you can provide, but because of who you are and who we become together. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Grace clapped her hands in delight, recognizing on some instinctive level that her family, once fragmented by contracts and fear, was now whole, bound together not by legal obligation but by the strongest ties of all, love, freely given and joyfully received. Sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unlikely ways. What matters isn't how a relationship starts, but how both people grow, learn, and choose each other day after day. True love isn't about perfect beginnings. It's about having the courage to tear up the contract, throw away the rulebook, and write your own story together. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with a sister who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to rewrite your own love story.